This very quick slideshow goes over how to write the hypothesis section of your final paper. So let's say that your research project looks at the relationship between juveniles and various other factors. And you've come up with these three hypotheses. Hypothesis set 1, gender and criminal activity are independent. For the null, for the alternative, gender and criminal activity are not independent. For the second hypothesis set, age and criminal activity are independent. The alternative, age and criminal activity are not independent. For the third set, the null is that if a juvenile has an older sibling or siblings who have a criminal history, or if they don't have a criminal history, and that person's criminal activity are independent. The alternative is that having an older sibling with a criminal history and criminal activity are not independent. And you could also phrase that alternative as having an older sibling or siblings with a criminal history or not having a criminal history, and the respondent's criminal activity are not independent of each other. So how do these hypothesis sets become your hypothesis section? Well, your section is going to start off with an introduction, and your introduction could be simple. In the literature review section of my paper, I summarized and analyzed the existing literature on factors that contribute to juvenile delinquency. In this section of the paper, I will state my hypotheses and explain how each hypothesis set is related to the literature discussed in the literature review. Generally, my hypotheses examine factors that other research studies have found to be related to juvenile delinquency. I will discuss my research design for testing these hypotheses in the next section of my paper. The second part of the hypothesis set part of your paper is just going to be an introduction to your first hypothesis set. It's going to say something like this, and it's always going to harken back to your literature review. It's going to say, in their research on factors affecting juvenile delinquency, Madden and Hatt, 2010, and Davis and Popper, 2015, both conducted studies where gender was found to be a significant variable in explaining whether or not a juvenile was caught committing crime. Overall, as I discussed in my literature review and as Hubbard, 2017, notes, females are not only less likely to commit crime as juveniles, but less likely to commit crime as adults as well. Consequently, I test the following hypotheses in my research. So the next part is to actually put in that hypothesis set that's related to what you just summarized. Hypothesis 1, null. Gender and criminal activity are independent. Hypothesis 1, alternative. Gender and criminal activity are not independent. Then, after you've stated those hypotheses, you need to transition to your next hypothesis set. So here's an example. Gender was not the only factor researchers have investigated in regards to juvenile delinquency. As noted in my literature review, age was also found to have an impact on delinquent behavior. Then you need to repeat parts 2, 3, and 4 from the above until you run out of hypotheses.